It's the summer of 1994 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a quintessential Southern town.
We believe in God, family, and what that stands for, character, integrity. Everyone is caring and cares about each other.
Most people know each other, and if not, their friends do.
It's very rare you go through a day that you don't see 5 or 6 or 7 or more people that you know.
One of the town's most notable residents is a man by the name of David Stevens, an extremely successful heart surgeon and a pillar of the community.
David was about 6 feet, 200 pounds, very dashing-looking guy, very certain in his manner, very funny, very intelligent.
David wasn't just well-respected as a cardiovascular surgeon, he was well-liked. On the streets, at the shopping mall, at the country club, everybody knew him and liked him.
But David isn't just any heart surgeon. He was the first one in the entire region.
That was a huge deal because there was no heart surgeon in this part of the state. Having a surgeon like that was like a rock star that lived among us.
David has been married to his wife, Karen, for 34 years. And now that their 2 kids are grown and out of the house, they've become fixtures at the luxurious Hattiesburg Country Club.
Karen and David were high school sweethearts. There was no doubt that he loved Karen, and she loved him dearly. David was Karen's life. He was her everything.
Thanks for coming out to the club with us.
She was just wonderful and would do anything for anybody.
But being the leading heart surgeon in this small town also means David spends most of his time at the hospital.
He operated most every day, at least 1 case, sometimes 2. So a lot of times he didn't get home until 9, 10 o'clock at night.
They're worried about these levels right here.
Plus, being only 1 of 2 surgeons, he was on call essentially every other night.
In the fall of 1994, David's team gets a new member, a hardworking 27-year-old nurse named Stephanie Kennedy. Bright and ambitious, Stephanie attended nursing school and then left her small working-class town in Louisiana for Hattiesburg.
She was assigned as Dr. Stevens' nurse. She maintains his case files, maintains his workload. They're together most of the day. So that relationship, a nurse-doctor relationship, is very close.
Stephanie was a very good nurse. She was very intelligent. She usually could take a situation and size it up very quickly and let the physician know what the problem was and what needed to be done. You'd have to worry about the patient, but she was taking care of the patient.
She also happens to be a former pageant queen with the looks to match.
Stephanie was a very attractive brunette with beautiful eyes, nice shape. She was very vivacious, very outgoing.
Stephanie was very popular. She was tall, homecoming queen, beauty pageant contestant. So she was very sure of herself and sure of her looks.
Absolutely.
I think she knew that she had physical assets and she actually would dress to accentuate those assets.
But when it comes to Stephanie's personality, there's a disconnect between her Southern beauty queen facade and her behavior among friends.
She was a brassy lady. I mean, whatever that she thought, it usually came right out the mouth.
She was crude and loud. She would not be the typical lady you would find as a socialite in the South. Stephanie wanted that, but her personality didn't fit into that.
By the fall of 1994, Stephanie is beginning to feel that she isn't living up to her full potential.
She was ambitious, and she was intelligent enough probably to have gone to medical school, but she had 2 children and didn't have any money to do that or enough time.
She's been married to her husband, a utility worker, since she was 18, raising their 2 kids and working hard to make ends meet.
They didn't have memberships to the country clubs or golf courses. They didn't take vacations. They didn't have jewels or new cars. She was from a very blue-collar background.
I think when Stephanie started working in the hospital setting as a nurse and meeting successful people and seeing their lifestyle and how her lifestyle was not the same.
Everything under control?
Absolutely, yes.
And I think that's what made it click in Stephanie's head, that she wanted to be that socialite. She wanted to be the ones that she would see on TV, the wealthy wives.
But Stephanie knows these are just pipe dreams, and for the time being, she simply feels trapped. Then, in the winter of 1994, the mood at the hospital begins to shift as the professional relationship between the 52-year-old surgeon and his 27-year-old nurse deepens into something more dangerous.
Every time you come on the floor, she would just be right there.
Your work has been incredible. You've done wonderful work. Beautiful work.
Well, thank you, doctor.
I believe Stephanie became more impressed with David than the typical nurse-doctor relationship. I believe it got to the point that she was infatuated with him.
As for David, he relishes the attention from the beautiful young nurse.
I don't think really initially he thought anything about it, but as time went on and as her attentions became more and more amorous, he actually started becoming enamored with her. I think he liked that edginess to her. That attracted him to her.
David begins to see in Stephanie the chance to experience the wild youth he never had.
He married Karen as a young man. They had children early on, so he never experienced that part of his life where he dated a lot of different girls or had that experience with the, girls that may have been a little bit edgier than what Karen was.
Then, one late night in the winter of 1994, David and Stephanie find themselves alone at the hospital.
David is drawn to Stephanie because she is the opposite of his wife. So Stephanie, with her brash, outgoing personality, maybe she's not sophisticated, but that's going to be exciting to David.
She was very enticing. And when this enticement comes up day after day after day, I think your defenses get broken down over time.
For David, those defenses are finally overwhelmed. Despite the enormous risk to their marriages and careers, their lips come together in that first supercharged kiss. It isn't long before David and Stephanie cross the ultimate line, from lustful fantasy to passionate lovemaking. Suddenly, David is living out his erotic dreams, unconcerned about becoming the subject of small-town gossip that could get back to his wife.
I think Stephanie was probably extremely inventive in the bedroom. Probably David had never encountered anything like it. She was like a no-holds-barred kind of person. Anything goes with her. So I would expect that he was kind of dazzled by all that.
She probably taught him things that he only read about. She was a sex pot. His dreams were being fulfilled. Sexually, let me say that.
David and Stephanie have committed the utmost betrayal against their spouses. But in small-town Hattiesburg, it's only a matter of time before the rumor mill is running at full speed, and the consequences will be explosive. In early 1995, Dr. David Stevens, a heart surgeon, and Stephanie Kennedy, his much younger nurse, are doing everything they can to keep their affair a secret in the small town of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. But the risk of getting caught having sex at work only adds to the excitement. But David's body isn't the only object of Stephanie's insatiable lust. She's becoming addicted to the sense of security she finds in David's arms, something she isn't getting from her husband at home.
Stephanie was captivated by David's position. She was captivated by David's money. She was captivated by being able to obtain a heart surgeon, being able to move up that social ladder, and it consumed her. It overtook her life.
I just want 5 minutes of your time.
Okay, well, I don't have 5 minutes right now. I'm sorry. They're paging me right now. I've really got to go.
Stephanie is quickly realizing there's only one sure way to make those dreams a reality.
Ultimately, she wanted to be a doctor's wife.
And Stephanie starts turning up the pressure on David to make that happen.
When are you going to leave her?
When I have more time, we're going to sit down and spend the time to really talk about it then.
To David, a high-profile member of the Hattiesburg elite, ending his marriage to his socialite wife, Karen, is no small thing.
We will talk about this later, okay? I promise.
There's no doubt David was torn. There's no doubt he loved Karen, but I believe the temptation of the affair, the newness of the affair was pulling him and tearing him in two.
Okay, I'll see you later.
But soon, his dirty little secret won't be his to tell. Despite all the sneaking around, David and Stephanie's affair becomes common knowledge among many of their hospital colleagues.
The affair was a rumor in the hospital. It was going around the medical community. Some people knew or suspected.
Okay, so, okay.
Okay, yeah, take that. Take that.
Okay, sure.
When people are having affairs, especially if they're in the throes of lust instead of love, they really miss all of the cues that are going on outside of their tunnel-visioned affair.
In a small town like Hattiesburg, it doesn't take long for the salacious news to make the rounds, until eventually it hits home. David's home. In February of 1995, just a few months into their affair, it all comes to a head.
It was obvious that Karen was suspicious. I mean, she was not blind to the rumors. She was hearing it too, and it was breaking her heart.
That's when Karen gets an unexpected phone call from David's mistress, Stephanie.
Hello?
She called. She was harassing Karen on the phone.
Suddenly, all of Karen's suspicions are confirmed.
This must be some sort of joke.
As Stephanie spills the vulgar details of her affair with David, for this straight-laced, doting wife and mother, the brutal truth is simply too much to bear.
Karen may have been in denial about the rumors swirling around about her husband, but when the husband's girlfriend calls up and confirms it, it really is a reality check.
Don't ever call here again. This is my house.
You can't deny it any longer. And in Karen's case, her entire world will come crashing down.
Karen immediately confronts David, and a vicious argument erupts. And then, in the heat of the moment, instead of denying the affair, David makes up his mind. He tells Karen he's leaving her to be with Stephanie.
You have to remember, her whole world revolved around David.
It's almost an implosion where the mind cannot wrap itself around the news that it's hearing. It's not just shock, it's a complete downward spiral.
And as she follows David out to the garage, she doesn't go empty-handed.
When she walked out into the garage, she had a gun.
Come back! No!
So David jumped behind the car door because he thought she was going to shoot him.
Put the gun down.
When paramedics arrive on the scene, they find their victim bleeding on the stairs. It's Karen, shot through the neck. She's rushed to David and Stephanie's place of work and admitted to intensive care. Meanwhile, David explains to police that in the course of the argument with Karen, she pulled out a gun and put it in her mouth.
Come back!
No! Don't shoot! Don't hurt yourself!
Don't leave me!
Put the gun
David
down.
continues to try to talk to her,
Let's go inside. Just put it down.
reassure her that whatever they're going through, they can work through.
When David thought the threat had passed, he turned to get into his car.
And then he heard a gunshot and turned around and saw her lying on the carport.
And when the gun went off, it went through her spinal cord back here. Didn't go through her brain, it went back to her neck. So immediately paralyzed her, but her brain was intact.
Against all odds, it looks like Karen is going to survive, though she will never walk again. She's moved to a rehab center in Jackson, Mississippi to begin her recovery. Within a few days, she's coherent enough to communicate with detectives, and she corroborates David's story.
From what we could relay through questioning is that she was trying to scare David into staying home and that she stumbled and the gun discharged.
David's been a heart surgeon for his entire career, so he's seen his share of trauma, but there is absolutely nothing in his medical training that could prepare him for seeing his own wife shoot herself in the head.
Having almost lost the mother of his children, David is overcome with relief that Karen will pull through. But just a few weeks later, when Karen seems to be on the road to recovery, tragedy strikes again.
Karen had become accidentally disconnected from the ventilator in Jackson, and she had become brain dead.
And on April 28, 1995, Karen dies.
What caused that ventilator to be disconnected, nobody ever really knew.
David's grief over the loss of his wife is difficult to bear, but he does find solace in Stephanie's arms.
Their relationship continued during this time and even grew stronger. It appeared that David had made some decisions that he was going to be with Stephanie.
And Stephanie also makes a decision to divorce her husband to be with David.
Once Karen died, David publicly started seeing Stephanie. They had a very open public relationship, so everyone knew that they were a couple.
We were all just kind of taken aback that he would behave like this.
David ignores what others are saying and simply goes towards Stephanie because now he's free to be with her.
And on May 11th, 1996, just 1 year after Karen's death, David and Stephanie shock Hattiesburg once again by making it official.
They married at David's home that he had shared with Karen.
It's the same house where Karen sustained the gunshot wound that ultimately took her life.
By getting married in David and Karen's marital home, David and Stephanie are sending a message. Karen is gone, Stephanie's here now, we have moved on, and you should too.
It's a provocative way to start their new life, but David and Stephanie are over the moon to be a married couple at last.
Now she's the spouse of the top surgeon here in Hattiesburg. So she's where she wanted to be.
But the newlyweds have no idea that fate is about to deal them a crushing blow, and that their scandalous beginnings will come back to haunt them. It's 1997 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and things are finally looking up for newlyweds David and Stephanie Stevens. After a 2-year affair, the tragic death of David's wife, and Stephanie's divorce, the heart surgeon and the young nurse are ready to build a life together. It's a fresh start, and each feels fulfilled in every way by their new relationship.
Beautiful young wife who apparently is just completely anything goes kind of situation in the bedroom. So I guess for him, it was kind of reliving his youth.
By the end of the year, the couple move out of the house David shared with his former wife and into a new property.
David built a brand new house with a swimming pool.
She wanted a home that she designed for her and David and her children. She went to all extremes to build this home. It was the most expensive material, the most expensive design.
It's a really nice house.
It seems as if Stephanie's fantasy life is finally coming true.
She had a nice car now, she had money, she had jewelry, and everything I think she had ever dreamt of.
Stephanie doesn't just get her Prince Charming, she gets everything that comes with the lavish lifestyle of a millionaire surgeon. This is the life of the elite that she has always wanted.
But Stephanie's castles in the air are about to come tumbling down. By 1998, 2 years into their marriage, David gets some startling news. He's tested positive for hepatitis C, a disease that attacks the liver.
David apparently had contracted it back in the early days of surgery, back when the levels of sanitation was not the same as they are today.
And his professional life unravels on the spot.
There's a problem getting malpractice insurance because if you're hepatitis C positive, you are at a risk to transmit that to patients if you happen to get cut while you're operating.
What do I do next?
Without malpractice insurance, David can't perform surgery.
What he could do was basically just read charts and diagnose and see patients and things like that. But, you know, the world was crashing quick around him.
His self-esteem took a big hit because with him, his identity was he was that stud heart surgeon.
Suddenly, the once prominent surgeon finds himself in a financial tailspin when his $500,000 a year paycheck is drastically cut down.
He was probably making not even 20% of what he was making before all his health issues happened.
I believe Stephanie realized that financially that things were going to change, that they would possibly have to sell the home. They would possibly have to do some lifestyle adjustments. That was her dream, and she had obtained it. Now she was losing it.
For the next 3 years, Stephanie nurses her husband as the couple does the best they can to face the challenges of David's illness. But by 2001, David's condition is worse than ever when, in addition to hepatitis C, he's diagnosed with diabetes and end-stage liver disease. Without a liver transplant, he won't live more than a few years. The news sends him spiraling into depression.
Dr. Stevens was a miserable man. You could tell he was depressed.
David's life has been turned upside down with these diagnoses. He's not just very physically ill, he's psychologically embattled. His entire identity was wrapped up in being a successful heart surgeon.
David is still able to do office work at the hospital, but his illness leaves him frequently exhausted and confined to bed. But despite their dwindling income, Stephanie scrapes together enough money to hire additional help and maintain a semblance of their formerly luxurious lifestyle.
She had house servants, she had maids, she had men to fix the pool. She would lift no finger in anything in the house. She would hire it done. And that's what she wanted. She liked that lifestyle.
One of Stephanie's recent hires is a 25-year-old man named Chris.
Chris is a small frame individual, real thin, short hair, probably about 5'6", 5'7". Chris was hired initially by David and Stephanie to fix their saltwater aquarium.
He would come about the house and wanted to see how he can make money. He would hang out long enough with Stephanie to see if she would give him some kind of job so he can get paid.
Chris and Stephanie had a good relationship. They would talk, and Chris dealt mostly with Stephanie. He did not deal with David.
According to some of the other staff, however, Chris has been known to behave inappropriately towards the lady of the house.
He was very flirtatious and very open about things. He would sit at the foot of the bed and rub her feet. It was just strange.
While Stephanie is grateful to have a cheerful young man in the house, she remains dedicated to nursing her ailing husband back to health. The young wife is optimistic that after a liver transplant, David will once again be at the top of his game. But that hope is about to be dashed forever. The morning of May 1st, 2001 is like any other morning in the Stevens household when Stephanie comes running into the kitchen, sobbing.
Stephanie comes out with her hands over her face.
Oh my God. Are you okay?
And she's in panic. I said, what happened? She said, I was asleep. When I woke up, David was dead. And I said, what? What are you talking about?
He's not breathing. He's not breathing.
Stephanie immediately calls a doctor friend to find out what to do. And then she calls 911. One of the first responders is the Forest County coroner.
I go in, and Stephanie is sitting up in the bed, and then Dr. Stevens is laying on the opposite end.
It appears that David has finally succumbed to his fatal illness.
From all indications from the time that we got into the funeral home, the whole scene was a natural death. I mean, there was nothing out of place.
Coroner's office, Butch Benedict, was prepared to rule the death as part of his liver failure. But as protocol calls, he had his deputy draw the blood and send it to the crime lab for toxicology analysis.
On May 5th of 2001, David Stevens is laid to rest. For now, all Stephanie can do is mourn the death of her husband and all that she's lost with his passing.
Stephanie's fairy tale marriage to David may have had its ups and downs, but in truth, she really loved her husband. And when he dies, this is genuinely devastating to her.
But the story of the death of Dr. David Stevens doesn't end here. Weeks later, the routine toxicology report comes in, and it contains one unexpected result.
Yeah, this is Butch.
Get a phone call from the crime lab that says, Butch, there's a question about this blood on Dr. Stevens. A tomidate was found in the system, and I'm like, what is that?
It turns out etomidate is a drug commonly used in hospitals to put patients to sleep before surgery.
Get back to you. Thanks.
And then that's when Rusty comes over and we start discussing some of the things that we need to do and how we're going to approach this.
Well, the boys from lab called and said that they found traces of etomidate.
What is that? I never heard of that.
Toxicologist tells him this is very strange. You don't see this in patients that are at home, that you usually see this in patients that have died during surgery.
It's a drug they use in surgery. It's a sedative.
If they use it in surgery, they can only get that in hospitals.
But David hasn't set foot in the OR in years, either as a surgeon or a patient.
I don't know if I've got a homicide, if I've got a suicide, if I've got an accident. I don't know. I just know that something is not right, that David did not just die a natural death. Something's going on here.
Did David accidentally overdose? Did depression push him over the edge, leading him to take his own life? Or is there something more sinister at play? It's May of 2001 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Stephanie Stevens is devastated after she finds her husband David, a former heart surgeon, dead in their bed.
She told me that she got up that morning and fixed her daughter's hair, and that once she got the kids off to school, she went back and laid down next to David, and then awoke about 1 o'clock and found him deceased.
David Stevens appears to have died of natural causes, But when the anesthetic etomidate turns up in his blood, detectives are stumped.
That shouldn't be in his system. That's a drug that's usually administered for some type of surgery or procedure.
Further research reveals that etomidate alone would have put him to sleep, but would not have killed him. Investigators decide to take a closer look at the circumstances surrounding David's death.
So I had to determine several things. One, how did he die? And two, how the etomidate got into his system.
The investigation next turns up a critical detail about David's treatment.
He'd been placed on insulin and was later supplied with an insulin pump to help regulate his insulin on a daily basis.
Detectives now wonder, is it possible that David was so depressed that he used his insulin pump to dose himself with a fatal cocktail of drugs? There's only one way to find out: to exhume David's body, buried just a few weeks prior.
So we knew at that point we had to do a full autopsy to determine the cause of death.
The results from David's autopsy come in.
During the autopsy, we was able to obtain specimens from the actual injection point of the insulin pump. And that's when a second anesthetic was found, atracurium. Now at that point, I'm like, okay, what is this?
With a second drug discovered in David's body, his death suddenly becomes much more suspicious. Atracurium, it turns out, is also used in surgery, but this drug causes patients to stop breathing. The atracurium levels in David's system are through the roof. And it's now clear, this is what killed him. But then, why would there also be etomidate in his system, which would have only put him to sleep?
If David wanted to commit suicide, he could have potentially put the atracurium in and killed himself, but then there wouldn't be any etomidate in his system.
That means someone else must have injected the etomidate that put him to sleep, and then administered the atracurium to kill him.
David could not administer the second drug to himself after he gave himself the first drug. And I knew then that for sure that I did not have a suicide.
What he has is a clear case of murder. But the only person in the house who knew how to operate the insulin pump was Stephanie. And as a hospital nurse, she also had easy access to the cocktail of drugs that killed him.
We just had them on a shelf back in our anesthesia closet where we would just go and get what we needed. So anybody could walk back there and get it. They knew what they were looking for. And Stephanie had full access to the operating room.
Investigators now consider a new possibility, that David, overcome with depression, asked Stephanie to help him commit suicide. But when detectives questioned David's friends and colleagues about his state of mind just before he died, a different picture emerges.
I think he was a little down about his situation, but he continued to be fairly chipper and came in and did his stuff, joked around with everybody.
He knew he was sick, but he was prepared to fight that battle and get better. He was very excited about getting ready for his liver transplant, and he was wanting to get his body in shape for the transplant. He was not preparing to end his life. He was preparing the new beginning of his life.
David's upbeat attitude, his determination to keep himself healthy, is simply not indicative of suicidal ideations.
So if David had no intention of killing himself, then Stephanie could not have snuffed out his life at his request, but only for reasons of her own. With Stephanie now the prime suspect, investigators soon discover she may have had the motive, as well as the means, to murder her husband.
David was not wealthy cash-wise at the time of his death, but he was extremely wealthy in annuities and in trust funds and stocks and bonds and things of that nature.
And much of that money went directly to Stephanie when David died. To top it off, the coroner recalls that on the day of the murder, Stephanie tampered with the one thing that could have tied her to the crime, David's insulin pump.
You know, I've never seen this before. I have no idea what she's doing, and she takes the batteries and the vials out. But later I found out that, you know, you can erase a memory and you know, there's no telling what was in those vials.
And with those vials went any trace of the drugs that killed David. So far, there's no hard evidence Stephanie Stevens murdered her husband in cold blood. But this grieving widow is harboring a dangerous stash of secrets, including the horrific truth behind David's death. It's July 2002, and for the past year, investigators in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, have strongly suspected that Dr. David Stevens was murdered by his wife, Stephanie. But with no evidence, they can't make an arrest. And then, out of the blue, detectives hear some interesting news through the grapevine.
I was able to learn that she was actually having an intimate relationship with her handyman, Chris.
It's the same man that she and David employed before David's death.
Stephanie is still in her 30s. She's beautiful, young, and hot, and obviously going to fall for Chris's attention. Chris is going to see Stephanie's situation as the land of opportunity.
And it looks like Stephanie and Chris have been taking advantage of that opportunity since before David died.
There was a relationship developing between Stephanie and Chris at the time of David's death.
But that's not all. Investigators also learned that less than a year after David's death, the couple tied the knot in true Sin City style.
She and Chris go to Vegas and take a bunch of their friends for a classic Vegas wedding. Casinos, partying, drinking.
While they were in Las Vegas partying, Stephanie had spent $80,000 of an annuity that had been given to her after David's death.
But even her new marriage and spendthrift ways aren't enough to get Stephanie charged and behind bars. Investigators decide to make a last-ditch effort to get any useful information on Stephanie by talking to everyone who knows her. In August of 2002, they come across Karen, one of the friends Stephanie and Chris partied with in Vegas, who also happened to be a witness at their wedding.
I just need a minute of your time. I need to ask you a couple of questions, okay?
Yeah.
To their astonishment, Karen reveals a startling confession Stephanie made during their decadent time together.
We're partying. He was just really depressed and he was sick and he wanted to die, so I helped him.
She told me that Stephanie told her she did it, that she killed David because David asked her to, because he was depressed and he, didn't want to suffer.
How did she do it?
Something with an insulin pump.
It looks like Stephanie's casual remark has provided a critical piece of the puzzle. And on September 12, 2002, Stephanie Stevens is arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators can now paint a picture of what really happened to David Stevens.
In the beginning, Stephanie and David's romance is very real. The fairy tale dreams, the hot sex, it all becomes true, except that Stephanie's love for David is inextricably linked to his money.
So when David fell ill and his sky-high income plummeted, the new life Stephanie had dreamed of for so long vanished.
I think she, in her way, sized it up very quickly that he was much more valuable dead than alive.
Stephanie chose May 1st, 2001 to carry out her diabolical plan. First, she prepared David's insulin pump, but instead of filling the cartridge with insulin, she used a vial of the anesthetic etomidate.
When you administer the etomidate, you become very sleepy, and just go into a deep sleep.
Almost immediately, the drug took effect.
And while he was under the influence of the etomidate, she initiated another bolus of atracurium.
This slowed down David's breathing.
So she had the foresight to actually put him to sleep before she gave him the deadly anesthetic that would kill him.
Finally, his breathing stopped, followed by his heart, and in a matter of seconds, Dr. David Stevens was dead. On September 8, 2003, 2 years after his death, the case goes to trial. Stephanie pleads not guilty. Despite her confession to her friend Karen, her defense argues that David took his own life by injecting the fatal drugs himself.
The defense was trying to paint a picture of a man that was suicidal, that did not want to live anymore. But at the end of the day, when you look at all the evidence, when you look at David's life and the days prior to his death, there was no other way to go but homicide.
It takes the jury only 90 minutes to come to a decision. On September 15th, 2003, they find Stephanie Stevens guilty of first-degree murder.
I think Stephanie was very calculating, very intelligent, and when she saw his status slipping and the money going away because he wasn't working like he was, the next best thing was for him to be dead and for her to have what was left of the money. In her mind, he was probably going to die anyway, so she kind of rationalized it.
Stephanie really believed till the end that she would get away with David's murder, that there was no way nobody could believe that she administered these drugs to kill him. But it didn't work. The jury saw through that, and justice was served.
There is a profound and unsettling contrast that exists when an act of unspeakable brutality occurs in a place of overwhelming natural beauty. The mind struggles to reconcile the image of a serene, tropical landscape with the grotesque reality of human violence. When we think of the South Pacific, we often envision a tranquil paradise, a remote sanctuary far removed from the chaotic malice that plagues crowded urban sprawls. We picture the gentle, rhythmic crashing of ocean waves against pristine shores, the lush, vibrant greenery swaying in the salt-tinged breeze, and small, close-knit communities where the pace of life is dictated by the sun rather than the clock. American Samoa, an unincorporated territory of the United States situated deep in the heart of the Polynesian island chain, embodies this idyllic imagery. It is a place characterized by its deep-rooted cultural traditions, where community ties are woven tightly and the concept of family extends far beyond the immediate household. It is a land where respect, faith, and mutual support are the foundational pillars of everyday existence. Yet, it is within this very setting, amidst the tranquil embrace of a small village, that we are reminded of a chilling universal truth. Human darkness is not confined by geography. It does not respect the borders of paradise. The capacity for extreme, senseless violence can lie dormant anywhere, waiting only for the most trivial of catalysts to ignite it into a devastating inferno. The village of Tuputamu is nestled on the southwestern coast of Tutuila, the main island of American Samoa. It is a modest, quiet settlement, the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name, where the roads are familiar, and where the mornings usually unfold with a predictable, comforting stillness. In February of the year 2020, the residents of Tuputamu were going about their daily routines, shaking off the remnants of the night and welcoming the early light of a new year. February in the South Pacific brings its own familiar cadence, a continuation of the warm, humid climate that blankets the islands. On one particular morning during this month, the peaceful facade of Tuputamu was irreparably shattered. The event that unfolded did not begin with a grand conspiracy or a deep-seated, long-standing feud. It did not involve rival factions or complex criminal enterprises. Instead, It was an incident born from a terrifyingly mundane interaction, escalated by the dangerous alchemy of severe intoxication and fragile egos. The horror that visited Teputimu that morning forces us to confront the terrifying fragility of human life and the absolute absurdity of the reasons for which it can be stolen. As the sun began to rise, casting its golden light over the dense tropical foliage lining the roads of the village, local residents began their morning commutes. Some were perhaps heading to work, others walking to visit family, or simply enjoying the early hours before the heat of the day reached its peak. It was during this routine movement along a quiet stretch of road in Teputimu that a horrifying discovery was made. Tucked away in a thick cluster of roadside bushes, partially obscured by the overgrown greenery, lay a shape that did not belong. As the residents drew closer, the devastating reality of the scene came into sharp, agonizing focus. It was the body of a man. But this was not a tragic scene of a natural passing or a simple accident. The visual evidence presented to those unfortunate enough to make the discovery was one of catastrophic, unbridled savagery. The body was lying motionless, but the stillness of death was overshadowed by the sheer volume of trauma inflicted upon the victim. The man was battered, crushed, and mutilated to a degree that rendered him entirely unrecognizable to the shocked onlookers. The physical devastation was so profound, the injuries so severe and concentrated, that it spoke of an attack driven not merely by a desire to harm, but by a frantic, overwhelming compulsion to obliterate. The immediate reaction of the villagers was one of profound shock and deep revulsion. In a community where violent crime of this magnitude is a rare and jarring anomaly, the sight of such extreme bodily destruction left an indelible scar on the collective psyche. The authorities were notified immediately. The Department of Public Safety in American Samoa quickly dispatched officers to the scene. The arrival of marked police vehicles, the flashing lights cutting through the quiet morning, and the deliberate, somber actions of law enforcement securing the perimeter marked the official beginning of a grim investigation. Yellow crime scene tape was drawn across the lush greenery, creating a stark, artificial boundary between the everyday world of Teputimu and the epicenter of a nightmare. The road was cordoned off, and the meticulous process of preserving evidence, photographing the gruesome tableau, and protecting the integrity of the scene commenced. The identity of the victim remained initially unknown to the public. In the early stages of the investigation, the press and the community were left with a haunting void where a name should have been. He was simply identified as a local indigenous man, a member of the broader community whose life had been violently extinguished and whose remains were casually discarded in the undergrowth like refuse. The withholding of his name in those initial reports added a layer of profound sadness to the tragedy. It emphasized the dehumanization he suffered in his final moments. He was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother or father, a man with a history, with memories, and with a future that had been unilaterally canceled. Yet, lying there in the dirt alongside the road, he was reduced to a puzzle for forensic investigators to solve, a broken vessel that bore the terrifying evidence of another human being's bottomless rage. As the police began to process the scene, the overarching question that hung heavy in the humid air was simply why. What possible justification, what perceived slight or monumental betrayal could warrant a physical assault so relentless that it left a human being completely deformed? In the realm of criminal investigation, investigators often look for standard motives. They look for financial gain, crimes of passion, jealousy, revenge, or the desperate acts of individuals backed into a corner. They search for a narrative that, while perhaps morally bankrupt, at least follows a twisted logical progression. However, the truth behind the Teputimu roadside murder defied any semblance of logical progression. When the motive was eventually unearthed, it did not provide closure or understanding. Instead, it amplified the horror and the senselessness of the act to an almost incomprehensible degree. The investigation would quickly reveal that the catalyst for this unimaginable violence was a dispute over money. But it was not a dispute over a life-changing inheritance, a stolen fortune, or a massive illicit drug debt. The entire, horrific sequence of events, the brutal beatings, the savage torture of an unconscious man, and the ultimate taking of a human life, revolved around the sum of $5. $5. It is an amount of money so trivial, so inconsequential in the grand scheme of human existence, that it barely registers in our daily transactions. It is the price of a cheap meal, a cup of coffee, or a minor convenience. Yet, in the distorted, alcohol-soaked reality of the perpetrators on that fateful night, those $5 transformed into a currency of death. The narrative pieced together by the authorities pointed directly at two local young men, Aparamo Tonia and Ofaisamalo. The allegation was that the unnamed victim had somehow taken or snatched this meager sum of $5 from the hand of Ofaisamalo. Under normal, sober circumstances, such a minor transgression might result in a brief verbal altercation, an annoyed demand for the money back, or simply a dismissive wave of the hand. But the circumstances on that night were deeply compromised. Both Aparamo Tonia and Ofaisamalo were heavily intoxicated. The excessive consumption of alcohol had thoroughly saturated their systems, stripping away the psychological barriers, the moral constraints, and the fundamental sense of empathy that prevents civilized individuals from descending into barbarism. Alcohol is frequently cited as a contributing factor in violent crimes, serving as a dangerous accelerant that magnifies aggressive impulses while simultaneously crippling the brain's ability to assess consequences or regulate emotional responses. In the case of Tonia and Malo, the intoxication acted as a dark prism, warping a trivial annoyance over $5 into a perceived insult of monumental proportions. It fueled a sudden, explosive surge of rage that completely bypassed any rational thought process. The perceived theft of a heavily crumpled $5 bill became a capital offense in their impaired minds, warranting immediate, catastrophic punishment. This tragic incident in American Samoa serves as a deeply disturbing case study on the lethal intersection of substance abuse and unchecked aggression. It forces a difficult conversation about how fragile the veneer of civilization truly is when exposed to the corrosive effects of excessive alcohol. It highlights a terrifying reality that exists not just in the remote villages of the Pacific, but in every community across the globe. The reality that underneath the surface of ordinary, everyday interactions, there exists the potential for sudden, explosive violence, often triggered by the most nonsensical and insignificant of reasons. The story of the Deputimo murder is not just a recounting of a criminal act. It is a somber reflection on the value we place on human life. It is a stark reminder of the devastating ripple effects that occur when individuals surrender their faculties to intoxicating substances and allow primal rage to dictate their actions. As we delve deeper into the specifics of how the events unfolded that night, how a minor dispute escalated into a relentless, torturous assault against a defenseless man, and how the authorities untangled the grim timeline leading to the arrests of Tonia and Malo, we must keep the victim at the forefront of our minds. We must remember the man whose life was brutally traded for a piece of paper worth $5, and we must grapple with the chilling reality that such profound darkness can manifest in even the most peaceful of places. To truly comprehend the magnitude of the loss experienced in the village of Deputimo, one must first understand the intricate cultural tapestry and the unique rhythm of life that defines American Samoa. This territory is not merely a collection of islands floating in the vast expanse of the South Pacific Ocean. It is a living, breathing testament to a deeply entrenched way of life, a philosophy that governs every aspect of existence, emphasizing communal harmony, profound respect for elders, and an unbreakable devotion to the extended family unit. In this societal structure, the individual is inexorably linked to the collective. An offense against one person is felt by the entire family network, and conversely, the achievements and joys of an individual elevate the entire community. The villages that the coastline of Tutuila are not just geographic boundaries mapped out by surveyors. They are ancestral homes, lands that have been nurtured and protected across countless generations. The ocean provides sustenance and a timeless connection to the navigating ancestors, while the dense volcanic mountains stand as silent, enduring guardians over the people. It is a world where modern influences blend with ancient traditions, where the ringing of church bells on a Sunday morning is as ubiquitous as the sound of the surf. Understanding this environment is absolutely vital because it starkly highlights the catastrophic disruption caused by the murder. The violence that claimed the life of the victim was not just a physical assault on a single human body. It was a profound desecration of the cultural sanctuary that defines the very essence of the islands. Tuputamo itself embodies the quintessential characteristics of these close-knit communities. Nestled on the southwestern edge of the island, the village is characterized by its tranquil atmosphere and the inherent warmth of its residents. Life here typically moves at a deliberate, unhurried pace. The architectural landscape is a mix of contemporary structures and traditional open-air meeting houses, reflecting a community that honors its past while navigating the present. The roads that wind through the village are lined with lush breadfruit trees, vibrant hibiscus flowers, and the omnipresent coconut palms that offer shade from the intense tropical sun. Everyone knows everyone else's lineage, their daily habits, and their personal histories. There is a collective watchful eye that usually serves as a protective blanket over the vulnerable, ensuring that children are cared for and the elderly are respected. In such a setting, anonymity is practically impossible. Yet, paradoxically, in the immediate aftermath of the horrific discovery in the roadside underbrush, the victim was stripped of his specific identity in the public discourse. The initial police reports and the cautious early media dispatches withheld his name, referring to him solely as a local indigenous man. This temporary erasure of his identity adds a profound layer of melancholy to his narrative. This mandated anonymity in the early stages of the investigation forces us to view the victim not just as a specific individual with a name, but as a universal representation of the community's vulnerability. He was a son of the island, a man whose roots were deeply embedded in the volcanic soil of Tutuila. His anonymity allows him to stand in for anyone as brother, uncle, or friend. When we construct a portrait of this man, we must draw upon the commonalities of indigenous life in the territory. We can envision a man who is familiar with the scent of the ocean spray at dawn, who understood the seasonal rhythms of the local agriculture, and whose hands were likely calloused from the demanding physical labor that characterizes much of island life. He would have been a participant in the communal gatherings, sharing food and stories, contributing to the familial obligations that are the bedrock of the society. His life, while perhaps ordinary in its daily execution, was entirely significant within the context of his family and his village. The tragedy lies in the absolute erasure of his potential, the sudden and violent termination of his life-us trajectory. The withholding of his name initially served a procedural purpose for law enforcement, allowing them to notify next of kin and secure evidence without the chaotic interference of public speculation. However, emotionally, it relegated him to the status of a forensic subject, a nameless entity defined solely by the horrific trauma inflicted upon his physical form. As an indigenous man of American Samoa, his existence was woven into a complex social fabric. He belonged to a lineage that stretched back through the centuries, a heritage rich with oral traditions, navigation lore, and a profound spiritual connection to the natural world. He was a caretaker of this legacy, even if only in the quiet, unspoken ways of daily living. Whether he was a fisherman casting nets into the azure waters, an agricultural worker tending to taro patches, or someone engaged in the growing modern economy of the island, his daily contributions mattered. The tragedy of his murder is magnified by the realization that he was navigating a world he knew intimately, a place where he had every right to feel safe and secure. The roadside where his life was brutally extinguished was not a foreign, hostile territory. It was a pathway through his own home. It was a route he had likely traveled countless times before, under the bright sun and beneath the starry canopy of the Pacific night. To be struck down with such overwhelming malice in an environment so familiar and fundamentally nurturing is a profound betrayal of the social contract that binds the village together. To understand how this man found himself in the crosshairs of such devastating violence, we must examine the specific social context of the hours leading up to his death. The environment that bred this tragedy was one of informal socialization, a common occurrence in any community where people gather to unwind at the end of the day or the week. In the balmy, humid evenings of American Samoa, it is entirely typical for individuals to congregate outside, finding respite from the heat under the shade of trees or on the porches of their homes. These gatherings are usually characterized by laughter, the sharing of music, and the consumption of food and beverages. However, when the beverage of choice is alcohol, and when that alcohol is consumed in large, unregulated quantities, the atmosphere can undergo a sinister transformation. On the night in question, the victim found himself in the proximity of Aparamotonia and Ophisamalo during one of these informal drinking sessions. The initial mood of the gathering remains obscured by the passage of time and the unreliability of intoxicated memories, but it is clear that the situation rapidly deteriorated. Alcohol acts as a deceptive social lubricant. Initially, it may lower inhibitions and foster a sense of camaraderie. But as consumption increases, it systematically dismantles the cognitive functions responsible for emotional regulation, rational thought, and moral judgment. In rural settings where entertainment options might be limited, binge drinking can sometimes become a destructive pastime for young men struggling with boredom, lack of economic opportunity, or other underlying social pressures. When Tonia and Malo became heavily intoxicated, their perception of reality became dangerously distorted. The victim, a fellow member of the indigenous community, ceased to be seen as a human being worthy of basic respect. Instead, through the clouded, aggressive lens of severe inebriation, he became a target. The camaraderie of the village was entirely suspended, replaced by a primitive, predatory dynamic. The victim was unwittingly drawn into a vortex of misplaced anger and impaired judgment. He was a man who likely had no intention of engaging in a physical altercation, a man who perhaps thought he was simply participating in a routine social interaction that had occurred harmlessly 100 times before. We must reflect heavily on those final hours of normalcy for the victim. We must imagine the mundane details of his day leading up to that fatal night. Perhaps he had shared a meal with his family, perhaps he had engaged in a brief, friendly conversation with a neighbor, or perhaps he had simply enjoyed the quiet solitude of an island afternoon. He could not have possibly anticipated the monstrous turn of events that awaited him. He could not have foreseen that an incredibly trivial interaction involving a mere $5 bill would be the catalyst for his complete destruction. The juxtaposition between the probable peacefulness of his daytime existence and the grotesque savagery of his nighttime demise is incredibly difficult to process. He was a man walking through his own village, existing within his own culture, surrounded by individuals who, under the sobering light of day, would likely recognize him as a brother of the island. Yet, the toxic alchemy of alcohol and unchecked ego transformed those familiar faces into the architects of his brutal demise. The true tragedy of the victim's profile lies in the immense void his absence created. Even without knowing his name immediately, the community felt the reverberations of his loss. A space at the dinner table was suddenly and permanently empty. A voice was silenced. A pair of hands that contributed to the daily labor of the village was stilled forever. The grief that engulfed his family must have been an unbearable, suffocating weight. They were forced to endure not only the profound sorrow of losing a loved one, but also the agonizing knowledge of how deeply he suffered in his final moments. They had to reconcile the gentle soul they knew with the violently disfigured remains recovered from the roadside brush. This immense psychological burden is the silent, enduring consequence of violent crime. It is a burden that the perpetrators, in their drunken frenzy, completely failed to consider when they unleashed their fury. Ultimately, the portrait of the victim is one of profound innocence, violently interrupted by the most absurd of rationales. He was a man whose life possessed inherent value, dignity, and purpose, simply by virtue of his humanity. He was part of an ancient, beautiful culture that prizes respect above all else. To have his life extinguished over a sum of money so insignificant that it is almost insulting to mention it in the same breath as a human life is a testament to the tragic absurdity of the situation. As we move forward to examine the harrowing details of the incident itself, we must carry the memory of this unnamed indigenous man with us. We must refuse to let him be defined solely by the violence that ended his life. Instead, We must remember him as a representative of the peaceful community he belonged to, a man who deserved to live out his days under the warm Samoan sun, surrounded by the love of his family and the comforting rhythms of his ancestral home. The road into Putamu should have simply been his pathway home, not his final, terrifying resting place. The descent into the darkness of that February night into Putamu began not with a grand announcement of malice, but with a silent, corrosive shift in atmosphere as the alcohol took hold. In the quiet, humid air of the evening, the boundaries of the village served as a sanctuary, but within the small, confined group where the victim encountered Aparamotonia and Ophisamalo, those boundaries were rapidly eroding. The social contract, which dictates that members of a community move through their shared spaces with a baseline of mutual respect, was about to be obliterated. What followed was a progression of events that defies human decency, a cascade of violence that transformed a mundane dispute into a scene of absolute, unmitigated horror. To understand the incident, one must move past the abstract concept of a crime and visualize the physical reality of the assault, the relentless and agonizing process by which one human being systematically dismantled the existence of another over a pittance of $5. The triggering mechanism for this explosion of brutality was, by all accounts, absurdly minuscule. In the world of high-stakes crime, motives are often complex and deep-seated, involving tangled histories of hatred or the lure of significant gain. Here, however, the motivation was reduced to the most elemental, distorted sense of ownership and immediate, drunken grievance. When the victim allegedly took the $5 bill from Ophisamalo's hand, he perhaps thought little of it, or perhaps the act itself was another symptom of the blurred lines caused by widespread intoxication in the group. But for Malo and his accomplice Aparamotonia, the currency lost its value as a medium of exchange and instead became a burning symbol of insult. Their intoxicated brains, stripped of the cognitive capacity to assess the proportionality of a reaction, fixated on the act as a grave violation. The loss of $5 was, in their impaired, aggressive states, an affront that could only be answered with an overwhelming, physical response. The frustration that usually finds an outlet in verbal disagreement or simple dismissal instead curdled into a primal desire to dominate, to punish, and to erase. The first stage of the attack was sudden and overwhelming, a violent outburst that caught the victim completely off guard. It began with the visceral impact of fists and boots, a flurry of blows aimed with a singular intent to cause injury. As the victim was knocked to the ground, the physical dynamic shifted from a confrontation between equals to a brutal, one-sided slaughter. It is critical to grasp the intensity of this moment, the sound of impact against human bone, the desperate, muffled cries for mercy that were likely silenced by the sheer weight of the assault, and the frantic, chaotic movements of the perpetrators as they lost themselves in a frenzy of rage. Tonia and Malo were not just attacking a man. They were attacking an object of their own creation, a scapegoat upon which they projected all their collective resentment, their boredom, and their deep-seated instability. Every blow was a rejection of humanity, a step further into the abyss where empathy no longer exists. As the violence continued, the nature of the encounter grew increasingly clinical in its cruelty. The victim, battered and overwhelmed, soon lost the ability to stand, let alone offer any meaningful defense. He was reduced to a state of complete, helpless agony, his body a map of trauma. Any observer of such a scene, had one been present, would have been struck by the terrifying duration of the assault. It was not a momentary lapse of judgment followed by an immediate retreat. It was a sustained, deliberate campaign of terror. The perpetrators continued to rain down blows, using not just their bodies but also whatever weapons they found in the immediate vicinity. The environment of the roadside in Putamu, with its scattered debris and forgotten tools, provided the lethal instruments for their frenzy. The fact that the assault persisted even when the victim was clearly incapacitated, lying on the ground, unresponsive and unable to resist, reveals the chilling depth of their malice. They were not merely trying to win a fight or recover their money. They were intent on total, irreversible destruction. The concept of the threshold of violence is vital here. In a normal human interaction, the brain signals a stop when the opponent is subdued, when the point of the disagreement has been addressed, or when the cost of continued aggression becomes apparent. But in the case of Tonia and Malo, those signals were dead. The alcohol had severed the connection between their actions and their consequences. They were locked in a tunnel of aggression, where the only objective was to continue until the target was no longer a threat, or perhaps until they had entirely exhausted the reservoir of rage that the alcohol had unlocked. The victim, whose name the public was denied, suffered this torture in the silence of the night, his screams likely absorbed by the dense foliage of the village edge, his plea for life unheard and unheeded by those who had once shared the common identity of their village. The physical state of the victim, when he was later discovered, tells the silent, harrowing story of those minutes. The descriptions of a body that was dangled as broken and deformed suggest an onslaught of industrial-grade violence. There were no areas of the body spared from the impact of their fury. The head, the chest, the limbs, every inch was subjected to a systematic, brutalizing force. This level of injury is not the result of a singular act of anger. It is the result of prolonged, focused, and malicious intent. To contemplate this is to confront the terrifying reality of what human beings are capable of when they abandon the shackles of morality and surrender to the most base, violent urges. The victim was reduced to a state of total vulnerability, a broken figure discarded in the dust, while the perpetrators, their pulse likely racing with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and intoxication, stood over him in a state of horrific triumph. Once the violence reached its inevitable conclusion, and the life of the victim was snuffed out, the perpetrators shifted into a state of panic and concealment. The realization that they had crossed the point of no return, that they had transformed from drunken troublemakers into murderers, likely began to dawn on them, but it did not lead to remorse. Instead, it led to the cold, calculated effort to erase the evidence of their crime. They dragged the lifeless body into the thick, overgrown bushes lining the road, attempting to hide the carnage from the sight of any early morning travelers. This action, performed with trembling hands and shallow, frantic breaths, was the ultimate act of disrespect. They treated a human being like waste to be hidden, a nuisance to be disposed of in the undergrowth, hoping that the dense vegetation of Teputamu would swallow their sin along with the body. The scene left behind, a patch of disturbed earth, perhaps a discarded item, and the silence of the bushes, was a stark, haunting reminder of the incident. The perpetrators then dispersed, retreating into the anonymity of the village, hoping to blend back into the rhythms of daily life, as if they had not just committed the most heinous of acts. They carried with them the secret of their crime, a burden of blood that would eventually unravel as the authorities began to piece together the events of that fateful night. But for those moments in the dark, they believed they had succeeded. They believed the victim would remain a faceless, nameless casualty of a forgotten roadside, and that their $5 grievance would remain buried in the dirt. As the sun began to climb, marking the beginning of a new day that the victim would never see, the contrast between the morning's beauty and the reality of the murder became even more profound. The village of Teputamu was waking up, the birds were beginning their morning chorus, and the routine of life was commencing, entirely unaware of the gruesome tableau waiting just a few yards away. The perpetrators' effort to hide the body was a testament to their own cowardice, an admission that they knew the society they lived in would not tolerate the depth of their depravity. They had tried to turn the act of murder into a hidden, private affair, but in the small, tightly knit world of the island, such a profound shadow could not remain cast for long. The stage was set for the discovery, for the arrival of the authorities, and for the slow, meticulous dismantling of the facade that the two young men had constructed in the wake of their brutal night. The incident, as horrific as it was in its execution, was merely the prologue to the struggle for justice that would follow, a journey that would reveal the hollow emptiness of the motive and the overwhelming gravity of the cost paid by the victim and his community. We are left with the image of a man, stripped of his life, his identity, and his dignity, lying in the dark, forgotten by his peers, but destined to be the center of a tragedy that would scar the memory of Teputamu forever. Every detail of the violence, the relentless nature of the assault, The use of weapons, the cold disregard for a body already broken, serves to highlight the urgent, necessary need for accountability to ensure that the lives of individuals cannot be extinguished on a whim and treated with such staggering, casual cruelty. The arrival of the morning sun in Teputamu did not bring the usual serenity to the village. Instead, it acted as the cold, unforgiving light that exposed the gruesome aftermath of the night's transgressions. As the residents began their commute, the veil of secrecy that the perpetrators had hoped to maintain was abruptly torn away. The discovery was not merely a tragic event, it was a profound violation of the community's collective sense of security. When the lifeless, deformed body was finally spotted amidst the tangled, lush undergrowth, the immediate reaction of those who witnessed it was a visceral mixture of shock, confusion, and profound sorrow. For the authorities, the arrival at the scene marked the beginning of a high-stakes, meticulously structured process of evidence collection, a necessary, clinical endeavor designed to strip away the chaos of the crime scene and reveal the cold, hard facts of the murder. The Department of Public Safety in American Samoa faced an immense challenge. They had to navigate a landscape of deep-rooted community ties while simultaneously pursuing a rigorous, objective investigation that would hold the perpetrators accountable for their savage act. The initial phase of the investigation was defined by the preservation of the scene. The immediate area surrounding the roadside bushes in Teputamu was cordoned off with high-visibility crime scene tape, creating a stark, artificial barrier between the everyday world and the site of the horror. Officers moved with deliberate, somber care, understanding that every piece of physical evidence, a displaced stone, a fragment of clothing, a smear of blood on the foliage, could be a critical component in building the case against the unidentified attackers. The scene was documented with exhaustive precision, capturing the angle at which the body was discarded and the signs of a desperate struggle that had occurred on the road before the victim was dragged to his final, humiliating resting place. This was a process of turning back the clock, attempting to reconstruct the final, agonizing moments of a life that had been stolen for a price that defies rational explanation. As the forensic teams worked, a parallel investigation began to unfold in the community. Law enforcement focused on gathering intelligence regarding the movements of individuals in the village on the night of the murder. Because Teputamu is a close-knit settlement, information about gatherings, social interactions, and alcohol-related activities usually travels quickly. The investigation was not aided by high-tech surveillance or digital footprints, but rather by the fundamental, human element of the village, the eyes and ears of the people who resided there. Officers conducted interviews with neighbors and potential witnesses, piecing together the timeline of the night. It soon became clear that the victim had been in the proximity of a social gathering where heavy drinking had occurred. The focus of the investigation narrowed as the accounts began to coalesce, pointing toward the activities of two young men, Aparamo Tonia and Ofaisa Malo. The process of connecting Tonia and Malo to the crime was a meticulous unraveling of the perpetrator's attempts to return to normalcy. While the two men had hoped their actions would remain buried in the anonymity of the bush, the ripple effects of their violence had already begun to surface. Witnesses who had observed the earlier interactions or the presence of the group at the location began to provide the crucial links that would eventually lead to their identification. The investigators had to navigate the delicate balance of communal pressure and the necessity of justice. In a setting where families are deeply integrated, naming someone as a murderer is a monumental, life-altering decision. However, the sheer gravity of the crime, the level of brutality, the callous disposal of the body, overrode any sense of collective silence. The truth was being spoken in fragments, and it was the task of the police to weave those fragments into a coherent, undeniable narrative. The interrogation phase was a critical turning point in the investigation. When Tonia and Malo were taken into custody, the atmosphere in the precinct was heavy with the weight of the evidence that had been gathered. The police were no longer working with abstract possibilities. They were working with a timeline that suggested intent and a level of violence that required premeditation or, at the very least, a singular, unchecked focus on destruction. The challenge during these interviews was to strip away the defenses of the suspects, to confront them with the reality of their actions, and to document the truth before they could coordinate their stories or minimize their roles. The motive, the $5, was so absurd that it likely surfaced as a point of disbelief even for the investigators. How does one go from a disagreement about a trivial amount of money to the systematic killing of a man? This question was likely the central thread of the questioning, a probe into the psyche of the perpetrators to understand how the alcohol, the ego, and the environment had converged to produce such a grotesque outcome. During these interrogations, the details of the incident began to emerge with sickening clarity. The account of the victim being struck for the loss of the $5 provided the chilling answer to the why, but it did little to explain the how. The brutality of the assault, the decision to continue the violence even after the victim was incapacitated, suggested that the incident was not merely a heat-of-the-moment mistake. It was a prolonged, active participation in death. The investigators had to document these details with clinical detachment, ensuring that every statement, every admission, and every inconsistency was recorded for the trial that would surely follow. The psychological toll on the investigators, who had to listen to the mundane, selfish justification for a life taken, cannot be understated. They were forced to look into the eyes of men who had traded a human existence for a currency that wouldn't even cover the cost of a basic meal. As the physical evidence was matched with the statements of the perpetrators and witnesses, the case began to crystallize. The forensics report, detailing the injuries and confirming that the violence was indeed the cause of death, acted as the final anchor for the charges of murder. The investigation had moved from the initial, traumatic discovery in the roadside bush to a point where justice was no longer a question of who or how, but a question of when the judicial system would formally address the horror. For the family of the victim, this phase of the investigation offered the first, painful steps toward accountability. They were forced to learn the grim details of how their loved one had suffered, a knowledge that would leave a permanent, aching void. The police, meanwhile, continued their work with a sense of duty that transcended the specific village, knowing that a crime of this magnitude left unpunished would strike at the very foundation of the island's societal peace. The investigation was also an exercise in patience and precision. Every detail had to be triple-checked to ensure that the eventual prosecution would be ironclad. There could be no ambiguity, no room for defense lawyers to exploit gaps in the timeline or inconsistencies in the evidence. The investigators combed through the area multiple times, re-interviewed witnesses, and double-checked the forensics. The commitment to the truth was the only way to honor the victim, to ensure that the narrative of his final night would be told with accuracy and gravity in the halls of justice. This phase of the investigation, while less visible to the public than the discovery of the body, was the most critical. It was here that the foundation of the legal case was built, stone by heavy stone, ensuring that the act of violence that occurred in the shadow of the trees in Tuputamu would be met with the full force of the law. In hindsight, the efficiency of the investigation serves as a testament to the resilience of the community and the dedication of those responsible for maintaining the order. Despite the horrific nature of the crime, the mechanisms of justice functioned with a somber, necessary persistence. The investigation was not just about the capture of two men, it was about the reclamation of the community from the shadow of the violence they had unleashed. Every step taken by the police was a step away from the confusion and chaos of the discovery and toward the clarity and finality of the courtroom. The investigation stands as a record of a tragedy, a document that preserves the truth of the victim's final moments so that he will never be reduced to a nameless, forgotten entity. Through the long hours of collection, interrogation, and analysis, the authorities ensured that the story of his life would not be silenced by the brutality of his death, but would instead serve as the basis for a judgment that would define the consequences of such senseless, unfathomable evil. The investigation was the bridge between the nightmare of the roadside and the resolution of the court, a bridge built with the steady, unwavering work of those who refused to let the crime go unanswered. As the case was prepared for the next stage, the community of Tuputamu began the long, difficult process of reckoning with the fact that two of their own had been capable of such an act, a process that would require not just the legal conclusion, but a deep, collective soul-searching that would resonate far beyond the conclusion of the trial. The transition from the raw, Visceral trauma of the crime scene to the formal, sterilized environment of the courtroom marked a significant shift in the narrative of the Teputimu murder. The judicial proceedings that followed were not merely a bureaucratic requirement. They were the essential mechanism through which society attempts to impose order on the chaos of senseless violence. In the halls of justice, the horrific details that had once been whispered in the village were now laid bare under the harsh light of legal scrutiny, forced into the public record to be analyzed, dissected, and ultimately judged. For the families involved, the trial was a period of agonizing endurance, a time when they were required to sit in the presence of the men who had extinguished a life for a triviality, listening to the dispassionate clinical accounts of injuries that defied the comprehension of any rational person. The legal process in American Samoa, operating under the framework of U.S. law while deeply cognizant of the island's unique cultural nuances, faced the formidable task of delivering a verdict that would reflect the gravity of the offense while maintaining the integrity of the judicial system. Inside the courtroom, the presence of Aparamo Tonia and Ofaisa Malo stood as a stark reminder of the fallibility of the human condition. Stripped of the protective haze of their intoxication, the two young men were forced to confront the reality of their actions. The prosecution, building upon the exhaustive work of the investigators, presented a case that focused on the undeniable link between their behavior and the death of the victim. The defense, faced with the overwhelming nature of the evidence, the forensic findings, the witness testimonies, and the admissions gathered during the initial interrogations, had a narrow path to tread. There were no complex conspiracies to unravel, no ambiguous motives to exploit. The reality was as simple as it was devastating. An argument over $5 had spiraled into a murderous assault. The legal strategy, therefore, moved toward an examination of the degree of intent and the factors that had contributed to the total loss of control. The court was forced to confront the role of alcohol not as an excuse, but as a lens through which to view the defendant's capacity for malice. The testimony during the trial served to reconstruct the final, tragic timeline with agonizing precision. Witnesses were called to describe the atmosphere of the night, the progression of the drinking, and the sudden eruption of hostility that had shattered the peace of the village. For the jury, this was a journey through a nightmare. They heard accounts of the initial disagreement, the moments when the dispute over the $5 turned from verbal friction into a physical assault. The descriptions provided by the prosecution painted a picture of a relentless, escalating brutality. It was not a single, reflexive blow. It was a sustained act of violence that continued long after the victim had been reduced to a state of total, unresisting helplessness. The jury was forced to visualize the scene in the roadside bushes, to consider the physical state of the victim, and to grapple with the disturbing reality that such savagery had occurred within their own community. The testimony was the bridge that connected the courtroom to the road in Teputimu, translating the physical evidence into a moral judgment. The prosecution's approach was methodical and unyielding, aimed at ensuring that the jury understood the weight of the crime. They emphasized the victim's vulnerability and the cold, calculated nature of the concealment attempt. By focusing on the act of dragging the body into the undergrowth, they framed the behavior of Tonia and Malo not as a fleeting mistake, but as a deliberate effort to evade accountability. This distinction was critical. It shifted the narrative from a crime of passion to a crime of choice, where the perpetrators had the opportunity to stop, to seek help, or to admit their wrongdoing, but instead chose the path of cover-up and further destruction. The courtroom became a space for accountability, a place where the victim, who had been stripped of his voice, was finally heard through the evidence and the testimony of those who sought justice on his behalf. Throughout the proceedings, the families of the victim and the defendants were present, creating a palpable, stifling tension. The grief of the victim's family, a profound and enduring shadow, contrasted with the quiet, perhaps regretful, but ultimately overwhelmed presence of the families of the perpetrators. It is in these moments that the true impact of the crime is most visible. The tragedy is not limited to the one whose life was taken, but ripples outward to affect the entire social fabric, leaving scars that would last for generations. The judge, presiding over the process with a sense of solemn duty, ensured that the trial adhered to the highest standards of justice. Every objection, Every piece of evidence and every statement was handled with the care required for such a momentous decision. The courtroom was the final battleground, where the initial horror of the roadside incident was tempered by the logic and the rules of the law, a process meant to provide a measure of resolution to a situation that was, by its very nature, resolvable only in part. The trial also served as a reflection of the societal values regarding the sanctity of life. In the debates and the arguments presented, the underlying theme was the inherent worth of the victim. The prosecution consistently highlighted that the amount of money at the center of the dispute was irrelevant. The true crime was the dismissal of a human being's value. This message was a powerful one, intended to resonate beyond the courtroom walls. It was a stand against the normalization of violence and a declaration that, even in the face of substance abuse and social displacement, the taking of a human life remains the ultimate transgression. The legal team worked to ensure that the verdict would be a clear, unambiguous statement of this principle, holding the perpetrators fully accountable for the irreversible loss they had caused. As the proceedings reached their conclusion, the final arguments underscored the weight of the responsibility held by the jury. They were tasked not just with determining guilt, but with acknowledging the depth of the tragedy. The deliberation period was a time of reflection, a space where the jurors had to synthesize the accounts, the forensics, and the legal arguments into a single, binding decision. The outcome of the trial was the culmination of the efforts of everyone involved: the investigators who had pieced together the timeline, the witnesses who had braved the discomfort of speaking the truth, and the legal teams who had argued the case with precision. It was the moment where the chaos of the February night was finally distilled into the form of justice. When the verdict was delivered, it provided a form of closure, though one that could never truly mend the broken lives left in the wake of the crime. The sentencing, which followed the finding of guilt, was the final, heavy word of the law. It was an acknowledgement that the actions of Tonia and Malo had consequences that were absolute and lasting. The court, by imposing the appropriate penalties, fulfilled its obligation to the victim and the community, ensuring that the act of violence in Tuputamu would not be forgotten or trivialized. This legal conclusion, however, was only the beginning of a longer, more difficult process for the families involved, a journey toward healing that would be shaped by the finality of the court's decision. The trial, with all its rigor and its formal gravity, stood as a testament to the fact that no matter how trivial the motive or how secluded the location, the law is designed to find and address the truth. It ensured that the life of the unnamed victim was honored with a process that sought justice, providing a record that would testify to his value long after the courtroom had cleared and the echo of the proceedings had faded into the quiet of the island night. The legal system had fulfilled its function, not by undoing the crime, but by holding the weight of it, firmly and finally, in the hands of the law. The echoes of the courtroom, once filled with the weight of legal testimony and the finality of the verdict, eventually faded, leaving the village of Tuputamu to confront the lingering, somber reality of what had transpired. When the dust of the legal proceedings settled, the community was left not with a sense of restored order, but with the haunting, persistent question of how such a senseless act could have manifested in their midst. The murder of the unnamed local man, triggered by the paltry sum of $5 and fueled by the toxic convergence of intoxication and unrestrained rage, became an indelible scar on the collective memory of the island. The consequences of this tragedy extend far beyond the prison walls that now contain Aparamo Tonia and Ofaisa Malo. It has forced a deep, uncomfortable, and necessary reflection on the vulnerabilities that exist within the social fabric of American Samoa, prompting a shift in how the community perceives the risks of substance abuse, the fragile nature of social peace, and the absolute, irreplaceable value of human life. The primary, most devastating consequence is the permanent void left in the lives of the victim's family. The legal resolution of the case, while providing a degree of accountability, serves as an insufficient remedy for the profound loss of a son, a brother, or a friend. The grieving process for such a sudden and violent death is exacerbated by the knowledge of how the victim suffered in his final hours. They must grapple with the image of his last moments, a memory that is not just a reflection of his death, but a testament to the cruelty of his attackers. This form of grief does not simply pass. It becomes a part of the family's identity, a constant, heavy presence that informs their outlook on the world and their trust in others. The community, in turn, is tasked with the burden of supporting these individuals as they navigate a path that has no clear map, providing a space for their sorrow and ensuring that the victim is remembered not for the violence that ended his life, but for the life he lived prior to that final, tragic night. For the village of Tuputamu, the murder served as a brutal, necessary awakening. The illusion of safety, the belief that the remote beauty of the islands acted as a natural shield against the darker impulses of humanity, was irreparably shattered. The villagers were forced to confront the reality that the ingredients for catastrophe exist everywhere, in the quiet hours of a night, in the casual social gatherings that are the backbone of their culture, and in the choices made by individuals under the influence of alcohol. This realization has triggered an ongoing, difficult dialogue about the pervasive nature of binge drinking in the community. It has become a subject that can no longer be ignored or treated with a casual, indifferent shrug. The tragedy has acted as a catalyst for advocacy, for the implementation of educational programs, and for the reinforcing of communal values that prioritize respect and de-escalation over impulsive violence. The memory of the $5 motive is a constant, stark reminder of what happens when these values are abandoned, serving as a cautionary tale that is passed down to the younger generation. The perpetrators, Tonia and Malo, are now figures of immense regret and a profound warning. Their existence, confined within the rigid structures of the penal system, represents the ultimate waste of potential, a double tragedy in its own right. They are young men who, in a moment of drunken madness, threw away their futures and irreparably damaged the lives of countless others. Their path should serve as a chilling lesson to their peers about the lethal intersection of anger and substance abuse. It is a reminder that the brain's capacity for violence, when unlocked by the corrosive effects of alcohol, does not distinguish between a minor disagreement and a life-altering act of murder. Their story is now woven into the history of the village, a cautionary narrative that speaks to the need for personal accountability and the importance of maintaining control over one's own faculties, even and especially in the most relaxed of social environments. As we look back on the events of February 2020, we must also reflect on the broader societal implications of such a crime. The murder of a man for $5 is an absurdity that highlights the dangers of devaluing human life to the point where it becomes a commodity. It forces us to examine our own social structures and ask, are we providing enough support to our youth? Are we creating environments where aggression is not just discouraged but actively mitigated? Are we fostering the types of connections that prevent individuals from falling into the isolation or the cycles of self-destruction that led to this tragedy? The answer is never a simple one, but the necessity of the inquiry is undeniable. The tragedy in Tuputamu is not an isolated, freak occurrence. It is a manifestation of systemic vulnerabilities that exist in societies across the globe. By analyzing the specifics of this case, the role of the alcohol, the triviality of the motive, the savagery of the act, and the meticulousness of the investigation, we gain a deeper understanding of the fragility of civilization and our shared responsibility to protect it. The process of healing for the community is a long, arduous road that requires more than just the closure of a legal file. It requires the deliberate, daily practice of kindness, the active fostering of communal bonds, and the constant, vigilant reminder of what can happen when those bonds are frayed. It involves honoring the victim by creating a society where such an act is fundamentally unthinkable. This means investing in the mental and physical health of the community members, promoting healthy ways of coping with frustration or disappointment, and ensuring that the voice of the victim is never truly silenced. It is about creating a culture that values the human being above the material, that recognizes the profound danger of allowing rage to dictate our actions, and that holds each other to a standard of respect that is unwavering, regardless of the circumstances. In the final analysis, the story of the Tuputamu murder is one that carries a heavy, enduring weight. It is a narrative of loss, of violence, of accountability, and of the difficult, necessary journey toward healing. The victim, who was denied his identity in the initial public reports, must remain the centerpiece of our reflection. We must remember him as a person who had dreams, who had a place in his family and his village, and whose life was stolen in the most senseless of ways. We owe it to him, and to all the victims of similar crimes, to ensure that his tragedy serves as a beacon of change. We must refuse to let his death be in vain. Instead, we must use the memory of his suffering to fuel a deeper commitment to peace, to empathy, and to the protection of the innocent. The roadside in Teputimu, once a site of unimaginable horror, must be transformed into a symbol of our collective resolve to never again allow such darkness to take root. The path ahead is not easy, but it is necessary, for it is only through this deep, uncomfortable, and honest reflection that we can hope to build a world where the beauty of the landscape is matched by the peace and the security of the people who call it home. The memory of the man, the lesson of the $5, and the reality of the aftermath are now permanently etched into the history of American Samoa, a somber, constant reminder of our shared responsibility to preserve the sanctity of life in even the most tranquil of corners. This is the final, essential reflection. Our lives are not just our own. They are deeply, inevitably linked to those around us, and every act of violence that diminishes one, diminishes us all. We must act with the awareness of this truth, ensuring that the light of our humanity is never again extinguished by the shadows of such senseless, avoidable, and heartbreakingly trivial malice. The resonance of the Teputimu tragedy extends far beyond the immediate judicial closure or the personal grief of the victim's family. It functions as a societal mirror, reflecting the complexities of life in a territory where traditional customs and modern pressures constantly collide. As we reflect on the entirety of this event, we are forced to grapple with the reality that American Samoa, despite its outward appearance as a secluded paradise, is not immune to the pressures that plague societies globally. The murder was not just a failure of individual morality, it was an intersectional failure where alcohol, socioeconomic frustration, and the erosion of communal oversight converged to create a vacuum where violence could thrive. This final examination must look at the structural lessons learned from the case and the ongoing evolution of the community as it seeks to reconcile its ancestral identity with the challenges of the 21st century. By exploring these themes, we move from the specific details of the crime to the broader, existential questions it poses about the nature of community, the role of law, and the fundamental value of human existence. At the heart of the ongoing reflection is the role of the village structure itself. In traditional Samoan society, the village is the fundamental unit of governance and social support, characterized by a system where elders and leaders hold a significant degree of influence over the behavior of the youth. However, as modern influences seep into these remote settlements, this traditional oversight can become strained. The Teputimu case highlights a critical gap, the moment when social gatherings transition from community-building events to unregulated, alcohol-fueled episodes. The failure of the community to intervene before the situation spiraled into lethal violence serves as a wake-up call to the necessity of revitalizing these traditional safeguards. It is not enough to rely on the law to provide security after a tragedy. The community must foster a culture of active, collective responsibility. This means recognizing the early warning signs of destructive behavior, such as binge drinking or persistent displays of misplaced aggression, and addressing them within the family and the village before they result in irreparable harm. Furthermore, the prevalence of alcohol in such scenarios invites a necessary, albeit painful, discourse on the availability and normalization of intoxicating substances in island life. The substance was the catalyst that dismantled the perpetrator's inhibitions, allowing them to transform a $5 dispute into a death sentence. This is not to deflect culpability from Tonia and Malo, for they were the masters of their own actions, but it is to recognize that the accessibility of alcohol in a community that may lack sufficient mental health resources or youth-focused programming is a structural risk factor. Moving forward, the conversation must expand to include comprehensive educational outreach that addresses the biological and psychological impacts of severe intoxication, particularly on the developing brains of young men. It requires a shift from viewing such violence as an anomalous, unexplainable event to seeing it as a preventable outcome that can be mitigated through sustained community-wide interventions. The goal is to build a resilient social structure where the default reaction to conflict is communication and mediation, not the escalation of violence. Another critical dimension of this reflection is the role of the media and the public in how victims of such crimes are remembered. By initially withholding the name of the victim, the narrative surrounding the case was, for a time, characterized by a strange, detached anonymity. While this was a procedural necessity for law enforcement, it had the unintended effect of stripping the victim of his humanity in the public sphere, reducing him to a forensic subject. As we look at the legacy of this case, we must strive for a better balance between the need for operational security during investigations and the need to honor the victim's identity and memory. Every victim is a person with a story, a network of relationships, and a rightful place in the community. To remember them only as the subject of a crime is a second, albeit subtler, form of violence. We must insist on narratives that emphasize the life that was taken, the value that was lost, and the grief that remains, rather than focusing exclusively on the morbid details of the murder itself. This shift in perspective is essential for the collective healing of the village and the broader territory. The legal system's involvement in the aftermath of the Deputemu case also provides a template for future responses to violent crime in American Samoa. The precision and dedication of the investigators, the prosecutors, and the judiciary demonstrate that the territory is capable of delivering rigorous, fair justice even in the face of deep communal discomfort. This process was vital in reinforcing the idea that no individual, regardless of their position within the village or their connections to the social fabric, is exempt from the consequences of their actions. The law, when applied with such consistency and impartiality, serves as the ultimate defender of the community's integrity. However, for this to be truly effective, the legal response must be paired with proactive restorative justice measures. True justice does not end at the sentencing. It continues through the long, arduous process of societal reconciliation, where the causes of the crime are addressed and the community works to heal the fractures that the act of violence has created. As we look toward the future, the Deputemu murder must remain a living lesson rather than a closed chapter. It is a cautionary tale that the youth of American Samoa must understand, not as a remote, abstract story, but as a real, terrifying possibility if they do not uphold the values of respect, empathy, and restraint. The legacy of the victim is the potential for positive change within the village. His death can be the impetus for policies, programs, and social shifts that prevent future tragedies. This involves a sustained commitment to creating spaces where young people feel seen, valued, and connected to the broader community, so that their sense of self is not tied to fleeting material grievances or destructive, alcohol-induced bravado. It means fostering an environment where the honor of an individual is derived from their contribution to the collective good, not from the ability to dominate others. Ultimately, the Deputemu incident is a testament to the fact that we are all, in a very profound sense, our brother's keeper. The breakdown of this protective, communal bond is what leads to such horrific outcomes. The path back to a stronger, safer society is built on the daily, microscopic choices made by every resident of the village. The choice to step in when someone is becoming dangerous, the choice to speak out against the normalization of violence, and the choice to prioritize the sanctity of life above the triviality of material gain. The memory of the February morning in 2020 should not be one of despair, but one of resolve. It is a call to action for every member of the territory to be more vigilant, more compassionate, and more committed to the preservation of the peace that defines their ancestral home. The $5 murder is a reminder of how quickly the light can be extinguished, but it is also a reminder of the power that the community holds in keeping that light burning. The journey toward full understanding and reconciliation is continuous. Every time we speak of the victim, every time we analyze the mistakes that led to his death, and every time we reaffirm our commitment to a nonviolent, respectful society, we are engaged in the act of healing. The road in Deputemu remains, a silent witness to the history it holds, but it is now also a pathway toward a more conscious, intentional future. The community has been scarred, but those scars can be the site of renewed strength and deepened wisdom. The reflection on this tragedy is not just an intellectual exercise, it is an emotional and moral necessity. It forces us to confront our capacity for both the darkest of actions and the brightest of recoveries. As the village moves forward, it carries the weight of the past not as an anchor, but as a compass, guiding its residents toward a version of themselves that is more resilient, more unified, and more protective of the precious, fragile dignity of every individual. The story of this murder is indeed a tragedy, but in the lessons drawn from its cold, hard reality, there exists the hope for a future where such a story is never told again. We conclude this reflection with a firm belief that the ultimate tribute to the victim is the creation of a community where every life is treated as an infinite, irreplaceable gift, and where the peace of the islands is preserved not just by the beauty of the landscape, but by the strength of the people who reside within it. The final act of our investigation into the Teputimu tragedy demands that we move beyond the immediate history of the crime and consider the long-term, psychological, and cultural legacy that this event has imprinted upon the village and the broader territory of American Samoa. When we examine the aftermath of such a senseless act, we must ask ourselves how a community reconciles with the fact that its own members, products of the same culture and shared ancestry, are capable of such profound brutality. This reflection is not merely an academic endeavor, it is a necessary process of soul-searching that defines the identity of a community in the wake of a catastrophe. The death of the victim, while absolute, has become a lens through which the island must view its vulnerabilities, its changing social dynamics, and the urgent need for a renewed commitment to the principles of mutual respect and communal safety that have sustained the people for generations. The legacy of the murder is not found in the crime itself, but in the shifts in perception, policy, and interpersonal conduct that it has necessitated. In the years following the incident, the discourse within the community has matured. There is now a more nuanced understanding of the danger posed by the intersection of unregulated alcohol consumption and the volatile pressures facing contemporary youth. The village of Teputimu has become a microcosm for a territory-wide effort to reclaim the social narrative from the grips of preventable violence. This reclamation is characterized by an increased emphasis on local leadership and the role of the extended family in monitoring the well-being of young adults. It is an acknowledgement that the state, through its police force and judicial system, can only react to the damage already done. The true work of prevention must happen at the ground level, in the spaces where people gather, converse, and inevitably struggle with the demands of their daily lives. The memory of the victim has become a beacon for this movement, a silent reminder that the price of indifference, or the failure to intervene, is the loss of a life that can never be replaced. The psychological burden placed on the survivors and those who witnessed the discovery of the body is a silent, enduring facet of this tragedy. Trauma in small, close-knit communities does not dissipate quickly. It becomes woven into the shared experience of the population. There is a deep, collective understanding that everyone was, in some small way, affected by the loss of the victim. This has prompted a growing interest in mental health awareness and support services within the territory, recognizing that trauma, when left unaddressed, can perpetuate cycles of anger and self-destruction. The move toward providing counseling and emotional support for the affected families and the community at large is a vital, transformative step. It signals a move away from the traditional stoicism that often dictates suffering in silence toward a more healthy, open recognition of the pain caused by violence. This cultural evolution, while slow, is perhaps the most significant positive outcome of the tragic events of February 2020. We must also confront the impact of this event on the perception of the village by outsiders and, more importantly, by the residents themselves. For a time, Teputimu was associated with the horror of the roadside murder, a stigma that the community had to actively work to overcome. This effort has required a collective demonstration of resilience, a commitment to showing that the village is defined by the warmth, culture, and hospitality of its people, rather than the isolated, monstrous actions of two individuals. The villagers have come together to reinforce their communal bonds, organizing events, supporting local initiatives, and ensuring that the narrative of their home is one of life and growth, not death and decay. This collective effort is a powerful testament to the strength of the Samoan spirit, which prioritizes the restoration of harmony and the continuity of the community above the temporary ruptures caused by the actions of the few. The judicial resolution of the case also left an important footprint in the legal history of the territory. By securing a conviction and ensuring that Tonia and Malo were held accountable, the justice system reaffirmed the rule of law and the principle that every human life is protected by the state. This legal certainty is essential for maintaining trust in the institutions that oversee the order of society. It has sent a clear message that violence, no matter how impulsive or fueled by substance abuse, will not be tolerated or excused. This, in turn, provides a measure of security for the residents, knowing that their community is governed by a system that takes their safety seriously. The trial stands as a permanent record of the state's dedication to its citizens, an objective counterpoint to the subjective cruelty of the perpetrators. Yet, even with the passage of time and the implementation of these improvements, the shadow of the $5 motive remains. It is the core of the tragedy, the element that makes it so difficult to process and so important to remember. It forces us to acknowledge that humans can sometimes operate in a realm of total, detached insanity, where the value of a fellow human being is eclipsed by a negligible material trifle. Recognizing this possibility is the first step toward building a barrier against it. We must maintain an environment where such distorted perceptions cannot find fertile ground, by consistently reinforcing the inherent value of every person within our social circle. This is not just a high-minded ideal, it is a pragmatic necessity for the maintenance of a peaceful, civil society. Every interaction, every minor dispute, and every moment of potential friction must be navigated with this awareness at the forefront of our consciousness. As we conclude this long examination, we find that the story of Teputamu is neither simple nor finished. It is an ongoing narrative of reckoning, of learning, and of the persistent, fragile, and absolutely vital nature of community. The victim is no longer an unknown man in an official report. He is a permanent part of the collective consciousness, a symbol of the fragility of our existence and the preciousness of our bonds. We hold his memory in the light of our resolve to never let his story be lost or minimized. His life, and the manner of its taking, have fundamentally changed the landscape of the territory, serving as a permanent, cautionary monument to the dangers of unchecked rage and the transformative power of a community that refuses to be broken. The future of American Samoa, and indeed any place touched by such a tragedy, lies in the ability to bridge the gap between the memory of the past and the demands of the future. The lesson of the February 2020 murder is one of vigilance, a call to be more present in the lives of our neighbors, more aware of the signs of distress, and more committed to the ideals of compassion and nonviolence. It is about fostering a culture where the strength of a person is defined not by their dominance, but by their capacity for empathy and their contribution to the shared peace. We carry the memory of the victim forward as a compass, guiding our efforts to build a world where the beauty of our islands is a reflection of the peace within our hearts. Ultimately, the story of this murder is a testament to the fact that while darkness can emerge in the most beautiful of places, the light of human kindness and community resilience is stronger. We have explored the incident from the discovery of the body to the final reflection on its legacy, and in doing so, we have honored the memory of the victim by ensuring that his story is told with the gravity, the complexity, and the depth that it deserves. May this record serve as a lasting reminder of the importance of the work we do to protect one another, to value the lives of those around us, and to maintain the delicate, sacred harmony of our villages. The path forward is built on the foundation of this understanding, ensuring that the tragedy of Teputamu becomes a beacon for a safer, more unified, and more compassionate future for every citizen of these islands. The work is never truly done, but in our shared commitment to this ideal, we find the strength to move forward, carry our losses, and continue to build a world worthy of the lives that have been entrusted to our care. In the quiet, humid air of the Pacific, the story lives on, not as a source of fear, but as a source of deep, abiding wisdom for all who take the time to listen. The final resolution of our inquiry into the Teputamu tragedy requires a deep, contemplative look at the enduring nature of truth and the necessity of keeping the narrative of such events alive. In the years that have passed since that dark February morning in 2020, the village of Teputamu has undergone a profound, if quiet, transformation. The physical landscape, with its lush greenery and rolling coastal vistas, remains as beautiful as it was before, yet the space itself is now imbued with a different layer of history. The road where the life of an unnamed local man was so violently extinguished has become more than just a route through the village. It is a site of memory, a place where the community acknowledges the fragility of the peace they work so hard to maintain. To speak of this event is to accept the discomfort of human darkness, but it is also an act of profound respect for the victim. By refusing to let his story fade into the oblivion of forgotten news cycles, we grant him the dignity that was stripped away by the perpetrators. His life, and the manner of its loss, now serves as an eternal, silent teacher to the youth of American Samoa, offering a lesson that is far more potent than any lecture or formal warning. The act of remembering is, at its core, a political and social statement. When we recount the details of how Aparamo Tonia and Ofaisamalo allowed themselves to descend into an abyss of intoxication and rage, we are not just telling a story of two individuals. We are identifying the fissures in our societal structure that allow such madness to occur. The $5, an amount so insignificantly small it mocks the gravity of the result, acts as the ultimate symbol of the distorted value system that can take root in the absence of moral anchor. Remembering this detail is crucial, for it serves as a constant reminder of the absurdity of the motive. It strips the act of any misguided romanticism or perceived weight, leaving only the stark, ugly truth. A human life was treated as a disposable object because of a triviality. This memory acts as a barrier, a mental fortification against the normalization of violence. It compels us to remain vigilant, to ensure that we never allow our own frustrations to eclipse the inherent, infinite value of another human being. As we look toward the future, the integration of this tragedy into the cultural history of the territory is a vital task. It is not about wallowing in the sorrow of the past, but about utilizing that past as a roadmap for a safer, more resilient future. The lessons gleaned from the investigation, the importance of community oversight, the dangers of substance abuse, the necessity of proactive youth engagement, must be codified into the daily practices of the village. This is how a community honors those it has lost. It learns, it adapts, and it grows stronger. The resilience of the Samoan people, a trait defined by centuries of navigating the vast and often unforgiving Pacific, is the engine that drives this evolution. It is a resilience that acknowledges the pain of the past while firmly setting its gaze on the horizon, committed to the idea that the harmony of the island is something that must be earned, nurtured, and defended by every generation. The judicial and legal legacy of the case also serves as a permanent testament to the importance of accountability. The fact that the system worked, that the perpetrators were identified, tried, and sentenced, provides a bedrock of certainty for the community. It ensures that the social contract, which is often tested by the actions of a few, remains intact. The law is the institutional memory of our collective moral boundaries, and in this instance, it acted with the precision and the gravity that the situation demanded. By documenting the incident so thoroughly, the legal system has preserved the truth, ensuring that no amount of time or convenient revisionism can obscure what actually transpired. This record is a public trust, a resource for those who will study the history of the islands and for those who seek to understand the systemic challenges of protecting life in a close-knit, evolving society. There is also a deeply personal dimension to this final reflection. Each of us, in our own lives, carries the potential for both profound kindness and, in our weakest, most distorted moments, the potential for harm. The Teputamu murder, while an extreme and localized event, speaks to a universal human condition, the vulnerability of our moral compass when exposed to the corrosive influence of addiction and the unchecked ego. We are all responsible for the environments we create, the friendships we cultivate, and the influence we exert on those around us. This is the ultimate lesson of the tragedy. We must be the guardians of our own impulses and the keepers of our neighbors' well-being. The murder was a failure of this fundamental, shared responsibility. By acknowledging this, we accept our role in preventing the next catastrophe. We become the sentinels of the peace, ensuring that the dark shadows which once fell upon a quiet road in Teputamu are never allowed to spread again. As the years continue to unfold, the story of the unnamed victim will slowly transition from a current tragedy to a historical one, yet its power should not diminish. It is a story that requires retelling, for it contains the essential elements of a moral compass for the community. We tell it to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. We tell it to honor the man who lost his life, and we tell it to affirm our commitment to a future that is defined by peace, respect, and the absolute sanctity of every person. In this way, the victim continues to contribute to the community long after his death. He is the quiet reminder of the stakes involved in our everyday interactions. He is the silent partner in every conversation about community health, every initiative against substance abuse, and every program aimed at uplifting the youth. His legacy is the collective resolve of a people who have looked into the heart of a nightmare and decided that they will not let it define them. In the final, lingering moments of this investigation, we recognize that the true measure of a society is not found in its moments of peace and prosperity, but in how it responds to the crises that threaten to tear it apart. American Samoa has met this crisis with a combination of legal rigor, communal reflection, and a deep, abiding commitment to the restoration of harmony. The path has been difficult, and the pain of the event is far from fully resolved, but the trajectory is one of progress. We leave the story of Teputamu not with a feeling of resolution, but with a feeling of ongoing commitment. The work of maintaining a community is never finished. It is a continuous, day-by-day effort that requires the dedication of all its members. The memory of the February morning is the fuel for this effort, a source of wisdom that continues to illuminate the path forward. We conclude this exploration with a final, profound acknowledgement of the fragility of the life that was lost. The man whose name was withheld by the initial reports is now known, if not by a name, then by the immense weight of the community's collective sorrow and resolve. He exists in the memory of the land, in the quiet wisdom of the elders who have seen the village through many seasons, and in the guarded, hopeful hearts of the young people who are learning how to live in a world that is at once beautiful and fraught with hidden dangers. The $5, the alcohol, the road, the bushes, these are the artifacts of a tragedy, but the enduring truth is the life itself. It was a life of value, a life of purpose, and a life that, even in its ending, has become a catalyst for a deeper, more enduring commitment to the common good. May we carry this truth with us, using it to navigate the complexities of our own lives and ensuring that the peace of the islands remains untarnished by the specter of such avoidable, heartbreaking violence. The story of Teputamu will remain as a sentinel, guarding the heart of the community and reminding us all, always, of the sacred trust we hold in our hands when we exist in the company of others. Through this, the victim is finally, truly honored, and the community finds its way toward a future that is worthy of the strength it has so clearly demonstrated in the wake of its greatest test. As we reach the final stage of our prolonged meditation on the events in Teputamu, we must address the ultimate question that lingers after the dust has settled and the legal process has concluded. How do we weave this horrific tragedy into the tapestry of the future without letting it consume the present? The narrative of the unnamed local man is not merely a dark stain on the history of American Samoa. It is a profound, albeit painful, pivot point. The way a community chooses to process such an event dictates its trajectory for decades to come. By engaging in this deep reflection, we have not only honored the victim by refusing to let his death be treated as a mere statistic, but we have also begun the essential work of fortification. We have moved from the initial shock of the discovery to a place of understanding, realizing that the murder was the culmination of specific, preventable failures. To ensure these failures are not repeated, the village and the territory must continue to treat the lessons learned as active, living principles rather than stagnant facts. The future of Teputamu depends on this sustained awareness, this commitment to looking forward while holding the past in a firm, steady gaze. One of the most vital aspects of this future is the empowerment of the next generation. The young men of American Samoa today are navigating a world that is vastly different from the one their ancestors inhabited. They are caught between the weight of tradition and the allure of modern, globalized influences, often without the necessary psychological tools to navigate the pressures of that duality. The Tuputama tragedy is a stark, unavoidable lesson in the cost of lacking those tools. When we speak to the youth about this case, we must move beyond the condemnation of the specific perpetrators and focus on the mechanics of their collapse. We must teach them that true strength is not found in dominance or the enforcement of one's will through violence, but in the capacity for emotional regulation, the ability to walk away from a volatile situation, and the courage to seek help when the weight of life becomes too heavy to bear alone. By framing the tragedy in this way, we transform a story of death into a pedagogy of life, ensuring that the next generation is better equipped to handle the stresses that, for Tonia and Malo, became a fatal trap. The role of the community as an active participant in the lives of its members cannot be overstated. The isolation that likely contributed to the mindset of the perpetrators is something that can be systematically dismantled through the strengthening of local ties. We must advocate for a return to the ethos of collective stewardship, where the well-being of the individual is recognized as inseparable from the well-being of the village. This involves creating, maintaining, and protecting spaces, both physical and psychological, where people can connect, communicate, and support one another in ways that do not rely on the false, temporary comfort of substances. It is about fostering a culture of radical empathy, where a neighbor's struggle is treated as a communal responsibility. This is the antithesis of the environment that allowed the Tuputama murder to occur, and it is the only viable path toward a future where the peace of the island is truly secure. We must also continue to acknowledge the limitations of our own understanding. The act of violence was, by its very nature, irrational and profound in its absurdity. To try and perfectly rationalize the behavior of the perpetrators is to reach for a clarity that the event itself lacks. There will always be a degree of mystery in the depths of human darkness, a chasm that we cannot fully map. Acknowledging this mystery is not an admission of defeat. It is an admission of humility. It reminds us that we are navigating a world where the unexpected can happen, and therefore, our vigilance must be constant. We do not stop looking for answers, but we accept that some truths are hidden in the wreckage of the psyche. Our goal, therefore, is not to achieve perfect understanding, but to achieve a perfect commitment to the values that prevent the darkness from finding a home. In these final reflections, let us hold the image of the roadside in Tuputama not as it was on that February morning, but as it is now, a place that has been returned to the natural cycle of the island. The foliage has grown over the site, the passage of time has reclaimed the earth, and the village continues its life, marked but unbroken. This is the natural order of things. Life persists, even in the shadow of death. Yet, the human order demands more than just persistence. It demands progress. It demands that we take the lessons learned from our most painful experiences and build something stronger, something that can withstand the tests of time. The unnamed victim, in his silence, has given us the greatest of gifts, the opportunity to become a better version of ourselves. His memory is the seed of this progress, and our commitment to justice, compassion, and communal unity is the water that will allow it to grow. This has been a long and arduous journey through the details of a crime that should never have happened. We have looked at the scene, the motive, the investigation, the trial, and the aftermath, not to relive the horror for its own sake, but to fulfill our duty as witnesses. A crime is not just an event that happens to the victim. It is an event that happens to the community, and the community is not healed until it has told its story, processed its grief, and taken action to prevent the repetition of the error. We have done that here. We have taken the fragmented, painful, and often confusing details of the Tuputama murder and reconstructed them into a coherent narrative that serves a purpose. That purpose is the protection of life and the reinforcement of the common good. We owe this to the victim, we owe it to the village, and we owe it to ourselves. As we bring this account to a close, let the reader understand that the responsibility now passes from the teller to the listener. The narrative of Tuputamu is now part of the wider history of the Pacific, a story that carries its own gravity and its own wisdom. What is done with this wisdom is the final, essential step. It is not enough to simply understand the tragedy. One must carry the weight of it into the future. Every person who encounters this story becomes a custodian of its lesson. We must carry the awareness of how quickly and absurdly a life can be lost, and use that awareness to inform our own choices. We must be the guardians of the peace, the voices for the voiceless, and the defenders of the sanctity of human existence. The road into Tuputamu is no longer just a stretch of asphalt and dirt. It is a symbol of our shared journey toward a world where such a tragedy is not just rare, but unthinkable. In the end, the light of human kindness must always be the guiding force. We have explored the darkness, we have dissected the shadows, and we have emerged on the other side with a clearer vision of what is required to maintain the harmony of our lives. The murder of the unnamed local man is a tragedy that will never be undone, but its impact is a force for good if we choose to make it so. Let us move forward with the resolve to protect the vulnerable, to challenge the destructive, and to nurture the connections that bind us all together as one human family. The islands of American Samoa, with their incomparable beauty and their deep, enduring cultural strength, will continue to stand as a testament to the resilience of the people. May they always be a place where the peace of the natural world is mirrored in the peace of the people, where the violence of the past is never revisited, and where every life is cherished as the precious, unique, and infinite gift that it truly is. This is the conclusion of our inquiry, and the beginning of the ongoing, vital work of living in the light of the lessons we have learned. The story of Tuputamu, in all its heartbreak and its hope, remains with us, a permanent, sacred part of our collective path toward the light. The finality of a tragedy often leaves us searching for a resolution that the harsh reality of life rarely provides. As we conclude this exhaustive exploration of the Tuputamu murder, we must accept that the true ending is not found in a court verdict or the closing of a case file. The true ending is found in the slow, persistent process of communal healing and the quiet resolve to ensure that the memory of the victim acts as a catalyst for a safer future. We have dissected the mechanics of the crime, the failures of the perpetrators, and the devastation brought upon the community, yet the most important work remains in the hands of those who continue to live on these islands. The story we have traced serves as an anchor, a fixed point in the historical narrative that allows the people of American Samoa to look back at their darkest hour and see not just the shadow, but the light of their own resilience. This resilience is the ultimate legacy of the tragedy, proving that even when confronted with the most absurd and brutal manifestations of human malice, a community can choose to stand together and rebuild. The path toward this collective healing is necessarily long and demanding. It requires a commitment to transparency, where the uncomfortable truths about substance abuse and social displacement are brought into the light rather than swept away by the convenience of silence. We have seen how the intersection of these factors created the perfect storm for the violence that occurred in February 2020. Recognizing this intersection is the first step toward creating interventions that are actually effective. We must move toward a future where our social structures are robust enough to catch those who are slipping through the cracks, where our village life is characterized by support rather than apathy, and where the youth are guided toward channels of expression that do not involve the degradation of others. This is a tall order, but it is the only way to honor the victim, whose life was taken in a moment that could have been prevented with a different set of choices. One of the most significant lessons of this tragedy is the fragility of the social contract. In a place like Tuputamu, the bonds between people are usually strong, based on years of shared history and common values. Yet these bonds are not indestructible. They require constant maintenance, a daily effort to communicate, to respect, and to look out for one another. The murder was a rupture in this fabric, a moment where the worst impulses of humanity were allowed to override the collective conscience. Repairing this fabric does not mean pretending the rupture never happened. It means reinforcing the surrounding areas, making the community tighter, more aware, and more protective of the individual lives that make up the whole. This is the essence of a resilient society, the ability to recognize its own vulnerability and respond by deepening its commitment to the common good. We must also recognize the importance of the internal narratives we tell ourselves about our history. If we choose to see the Tuputama murder as an anomaly, as a singular event that bears no relation to the broader currents of our lives, we risk missing the opportunity for growth. Instead, if we hold this event as a mirror, we can see the parts of ourselves and our society that need attention. We can see where we have been too tolerant of excessive drinking, where we have been too silent about the signs of burgeoning aggression, and where we have neglected the voices of those who are most vulnerable. By choosing this perspective, we take ownership of our future. We transform the tragedy from a source of shame into a source of wisdom. This is the hardest work, the work of the soul, but it is also the most rewarding, as it provides a map for the next generation to navigate the challenges that their ancestors could never have anticipated. The role of the victim in this story must remain central to our purpose. He was a person with potential, a person whose existence held intrinsic value, and his absence is a silence that echoes through the village. To speak of him is to keep his memory alive, and in doing so, we ensure that he is not just a ghost in the bushes, but a presence that guides our moral compass. We speak of him as a symbol of the human cost of violence, a representative of the innocent who deserve to walk through their villages without the threat of being extinguished by the madness of others. Every time we prioritize empathy, every time we choose to de-escalate, every time we reach out to someone who is struggling, we are acting in his name. This is the way we keep him present, by embedding his memory into the very structures of our behavior and our choices. As we look toward the horizon, we must embrace the idea that peace is a proactive endeavor. It is not the absence of conflict, for conflict is an inevitable part of the human experience. Rather, peace is the ability to navigate conflict with dignity and respect. It is the wisdom to know that the loss of $5 or any other material triviality is a tiny price to pay for the preservation of human life. We must teach this wisdom at every level of our society, from the home to the meeting house to the halls of governance. We must cultivate a culture where the value of a person is understood to be beyond calculation, and where the act of violence against another is seen as an act of self-destruction. This shift in values is the ultimate defense against the darkness that visited Tuputama. It is the foundation upon which a truly harmonious future is built. The legal and investigative components of this journey have provided us with the facts, but the emotional and spiritual components provide the meaning. We have seen how the law works to contain the violence, but it is the community that works to transform the trauma. The investigators, the prosecutors, and the jurors were the instruments of justice, but the villagers who choose to reach out to one another, who choose to create programs for the youth, and who choose to speak openly about the lessons of the past are the instruments of healing. Together, these elements form a comprehensive response to the crime. They demonstrate that while we cannot undo the past, we have the power to define its meaning in the present and its impact on the future. We conclude this exploration with a sense of solemn duty. We have traversed the landscape of a tragedy from the cold, hard facts of the incident to the reflective possibilities of its aftermath. We have walked this path with the victim at our side, ensuring that his reality is never obscured by the noise of the headlines or the passage of time. We have stood with the community, witnessing their pain and their strength. And now we leave this record, not as a finished work, but as an invitation to all who read it. We invite them to carry the weight of this story with care, to let it inform their own commitment to the sanctity of life, and to never forget the simple, terrible truth that we are all responsible for one another. The road into Tuputama, once marked by blood and tragedy, is now a road toward understanding. May it lead us to a place where we are all more aware, more compassionate, and more committed to the preservation of the peace. As the sunlight fades over the horizon of the Pacific, casting long shadows across the landscape of American Samoa, let us hold onto the light of our humanity. The darkness is a part of the world, but it does not have to be the dominant force. We have the power to choose, to act, and to build a world where such a story is no longer a reality we fear, but a ghost of the past that guides us toward the light. We have traveled far, and we have learned much, but the work of life continues. May we move forward with the wisdom we have gained, the empathy we have nurtured, and the resolve to protect the unique and fragile dignity of every person who calls these islands home. The inquiry ends here, but the journey toward the future is just beginning, and we carry with us the memory of the victim, a silent companion on our way toward a better, safer, and more compassionate tomorrow. The beauty of the islands is preserved in our care, and our commitment to each other is the strongest defense we have. Let us walk this path with our eyes open, our heart steady, and our purpose clear, honoring the life that was lost by dedicating our lives to the peace that remains.